My father raised his champagne glass to the house I had spent 12 years saving for and announced that I would be signing it over to my younger sister before the night was over. For one suspended second, nobody moved. The refrigerator hummed behind me. Ice shifted inside someone's glass. Across the living room, my coworker Hannah still held her phone up, recording what she thought was going to be a harmless housewarming speech. Dad smiled, as if he had just offered the room good news. 4 bedrooms, he said, for one woman. A few guests gave uncertain laughs. My fingers tightened around the brass key I had been holding for the ceremonial toast. It was still warm from my palm. Dad gestured toward Emily, who stood beside the fireplace with her husband Jason and their 2 children. Your sister has a family, he continued. People who actually need the space. Emily lowered her eyes, but she didn't look surprised. That was the first thing that made the room feel wrong. The second was my mother placing a cream-colored envelope beside the cake. Nothing complicated, Mom said. Her voice had the gentle rhythm she used whenever she wanted me to agree before I understood the question. Just a few preliminary papers. I stared at the envelope. 3 weeks earlier, Mom had asked whether the upstairs room facing the backyard got afternoon light. I had assumed she was interested in the renovations. Now Emily touched her daughter's shoulder and said, Lily could use that room. Noah can have the smaller one across the hall. She knew the floor plan. Not the general layout, the exact position of the bedrooms. A pressure started building beneath my ribs. This is my housewarming, I said. Dad's smile flattened. Exactly. The whole family is here, so we can settle it properly. Settle what? Mom slid the envelope closer to me. Your father and I have discussed this very carefully. That was not an answer. I opened the envelope. The first page was a borrower information worksheet. My full legal name appeared at the top. Below it were the name of my employer, an estimate of my annual salary, the balance range of my retirement account, and the last 4 digits of a savings account I had never discussed with Emily. The next page was labeled Draft Equity Transfer and Gift Letter. Behind it sat a refinance checklist and a consent page bearing the initials CB in a digital signature box. They were my initials. They were not mine. Whoever had entered the date used month, day, year with hyphens. I had spent nearly 2 decades writing dates with slashes because that was how our procurement system formatted them. It was a tiny difference. Tiny differences were what I was paid to notice. Where did you get my financial information? I asked. Mom glanced at Dad. Dad took a sip of champagne. Don't turn this into one of your audits. A few people near the kitchen quietly set down their plates. I looked at Emily. Did you know about this? Her hand remained on Lily's shoulder. Dad said it would be easier if everything was prepared first, she said. You always get anxious when there's too much paperwork. I looked back at the worksheet. They had not come to ask me for a favor. They had built the beginning of a transaction and brought it into my house as if my signature were the final courtesy. No, I said. Dad lowered his glass. You haven't even heard the plan. I don't need to hear a plan for giving away my house. You don't need 4 bedrooms. That isn't your decision. Emily's mouth tightened. Claire, we're paying almost $3,000 a month in rent. The kids' school is 15 minutes from here. You already checked the school? Mom did. Mom touched my forearm. Sweetheart, you're 42. You live alone. Emily has children. It's time to think beyond yourself. The old response rose automatically to my tongue. I can help another way. Let me look at my budget. I'm sorry this is stressful. I swallowed all 3. I spent 12 years building the down payment, I said. I paid for the inspections. I paid for the rewiring, the flooring, and the plumbing. Nobody in this family contributed to this house. Dad set his glass down hard enough to make the cake knife jump. Who taught you how to manage property? You gave me advice. I managed those duplexes for 8 years. The duplexes Aunt Margaret left to me. His jaw shifted. That income kept this family stable, he said. The words passed through the room like a draft. Not your property stayed stable. Not I protected your investment. This family. Dad pointed toward the cream-colored papers. In this family, whoever carries the costs earns the right to make decisions. My thumb moved over the teeth of the brass key. What costs did you carry for this house? He stared at me. I waited. No answer came. Emily stepped forward. Why are you humiliating him? A laugh almost escaped me, but there was no humor in it. My name is already on a loan worksheet I never authorized, and I'm humiliating him? Enough, Dad said. No. Tell me who gave a lender my salary and account information. His face changed, not dramatically, not in a way I could name with certainty. His mouth hardened, and his shoulders moved back, as if I had challenged him in front of men whose respect mattered. You will sign those papers, he said. Your sister needs this house more than you do. No. The sound arrived before the pain did. A sharp crack. My head turned. The edge of my tooth cut the inside of my lip, and the taste of metal spread across my tongue. Nobody laughed now. Hannah's phone was still raised. Dad's hand hung at his side. Then you're no daughter of mine, he said. For most of my life, those words would have done what the slap could not. They would have folded me. My mother used to say Dad's anger passed quickly if nobody challenged it. Emily used to cry until I apologized. I had spent years believing peace was something I created by making myself smaller than the person who had hurt me. I touched my lip. When I looked at my fingertips, there was a thin red line across them. Then, I put the house key on the counter, opened my banking app, and called the business banking number attached to the operating account for my duplexes. Dad took one step toward me. What are you doing? I lifted my free hand. Stay where you are, a representative answered. I gave my name, completed the identity questions, and requested an immediate temporary hold on outgoing transactions. I also need the secondary signatory's online access suspended pending review, I said. No changes without direct confirmation from me as the account owner. Mom's face lost its color. Claire, she whispered, don't do this in anger. I'm not angry enough to ignore it anymore. Dad pushed his phone into his pocket. You can't interfere with an operating account. Tenants depend on that money. I own the properties. I manage them. Not anymore. The representative confirmed the hold and gave me a reference number. I wrote it on the back of the unsigned consent page. Dad's phone vibrated less than 10 minutes later. He glanced at the screen. His breathing changed. Reverse it, he said. It was not an apology. It was not even a request. Mom stepped closer. Your father has quarterly payments coming out. I'll verify every legitimate payment myself. You don't understand the timing, she said. You can't freeze the account ending in 4,419 before the tax payment clears. The room went still again. I had not said the account number aloud. I looked at her. How do you know which account I froze? Mom's lips parted, but Emily spoke first. My children's tuition is due Monday. Jason reached for her arm. Emily. She pulled away from him too late. I heard my pulse in both ears. What does your children's tuition have to do with the operating account for my rental properties? Emily's eyes moved toward Dad. That was the moment my housewarming stopped being an argument about bedrooms. I picked up the cream-colored envelope and held it against my chest. Everyone in my family needs to leave. Dad gave a disbelieving laugh. This is a family matter. This is my home. I am your father. You made your position on that clear. Mom began crying. Quietly at first. Then with the uneven breaths that had brought me back into line since childhood. I looked past her at Hannah. Did your phone record everything? Hannah lowered it slowly. Yes. Please don't edit it or send it to anyone else. I need the original file. Dad turned toward her. You had no permission to record me. She was filming my housewarming speech in a room full of guests, I said. Do not speak to her. Alan, my mother's brother, moved between Dad and the nearest guests without touching anyone. Richard, he said. You should go. Dad stared at him, then at me. You will regret treating your family like criminals. I tasted blood again when I answered. You should leave before I make the second call. 20 minutes later, my parents' SUV backed out of the driveway. Emily and Jason followed with the children. Mom kept looking through the passenger window, as if waiting for me to run outside and stop them. I didn't. Hannah sent me the original video, while 3 guests remained to provide their names and phone numbers. I saved the file in 2 locations, photographed the cream-colored papers, and called the police. When the officer asked whether I wanted the incident documented, I heard my mother's voice inside my head. Don't destroy the family over one bad moment. I looked at the unsigned page, carrying my initials. Yes, I said. I want it documented. By the time the officers left, the cake had begun to lean toward one side. Champagne sat warm in half-empty glasses. My new living room smelled of frosting, flowers, and the metallic trace of my split lip. I changed the entry code and removed the temporary code I had given my parents. Then I noticed a thick folder beneath the side table where Dad had been standing. The label read, Bennett Duplexes, Full Accounting. Inside was a login instruction sheet, monthly summaries, and hundreds of pages of invoices. One document stopped me. Roof replacement, $9,800. I knew the address. I also knew the roof. 5 months earlier, I had driven past that duplex and noticed the same dark patch near the rear gutter that had been there for years. I turned another page. The invoice number appeared again. Same amount. Different duplex. My phone rang. Mom. I let it go to voicemail. A message arrived seconds later. You froze the wrong account. The quarterly taxes haven't been paid. Call your father and fix this before the bank starts asking questions. Not, are you hurt? Not, I'm sorry. Only the account. I opened my laptop and created a blank spreadsheet. Across the first row, I typed 5 headings. Expected, actual, variance, source, resolution. Then I entered the first invoice. Before I could enter the second, I called the loan officer listed on the refinance checklist. She confirmed that my parents had submitted old tax returns, employment information, and an asset worksheet for pre-qualification. No loan had been approved, and the lender still needed direct identity verification and updated documents from me. I never authorized the file, I said. There was a pause, followed by the sound of typing. I'm closing it now, she said. I'll preserve the communication history and email you written confirmation. The email arrived 6 minutes later. Attached was the first message my mother had sent the broker. One sentence had been highlighted by the loan officer. Claire will sign once the family explains why this is necessary. I read it twice. They had not expected my permission. They had expected my surrender. I returned to the folder and searched the next monthly report. The same $9,800 invoice number appeared for a third time. I had started with one roof that had never been replaced. By midnight, I understood that my father had not hidden one questionable expense. He had built an entire system around the fact that I had once been too afraid to check. Part 2. The question I stopped asking. The third copy of the roof invoice sat in the center of my laptop screen, while the rest of the house settled around me. New wood creaked as the temperature dropped. Somewhere upstairs, an air vent clicked on and pushed warm air through rooms that still smelled faintly of paint. The house had been mine for less than a month, yet the quiet already felt different from any place I had rented. There was no neighbor above me, no landlord's key, no lease renewal waiting to turn my life into someone else's decision. Still, I kept glancing toward the front door. The entry code had been changed. My parents' temporary code was gone. The police report number rested beside my keyboard, written beneath the banking reference number on the back of the unsigned consent page. Nothing about that should have required checking twice. I checked it anyway. My lip had stopped bleeding, though the inside remained swollen where it had caught against my tooth. Every time my tongue touched the cut, the sound of Dad's hand returned before the pain did. A sharp crack. Hannah's phone held the sound now. So did the original video saved in 2 separate folders. The officer had taken the names of the people who witnessed it. The lender had closed the unauthorized pre-qualification file and preserved the emails Mom had sent. For once, the truth had not been left alone in a room with my parents. That should have made breathing easier. Instead, my gaze returned to the thick accounting folder. The invoice number appeared in 3 monthly reports. Each entry listed the same amount, $9,800. The service descriptions changed slightly: full roof replacement, emergency roof remediation, structural roofing reserve, but the vendor name and invoice number remained identical. 3 descriptions, 3 payments, 1 number. A legitimate accounting system might duplicate a reference once. A data entry error could survive a monthly review. The same invoice crossing 2 properties and 3 reporting periods required more than carelessness. My mouse hovered over the next file. A login instruction sheet had been tucked behind the annual insurance summaries. The bank logo at the top belonged to the institution holding the duplex operating account. Under authorized users, Dad's name appeared beside the word administrator. My name appeared beneath his. Beside it, someone had typed owner statements only. The words pulled me backward 5 years. At the time, one of the duplexes had needed a new furnace control board. Dad told me the repair had cost nearly $6,000 because the system was obsolete and the technician had been forced to rebuild part of it. 2 weeks later, I had stopped at the property to deliver a holiday card to the tenants. A service sticker was visible on the furnace cabinet. The company name matched the invoice, so I took a picture of the sticker and called the number while sitting in my car. The receptionist found the job in less than a minute. Control board and labor came to $2,400, she told me. I remember staring through the windshield at the rain collecting along the curb. Was there any additional work? I asked. Not according to the closed ticket. Back then, suspicion had felt like disloyalty. Instead of requesting the records directly, I drove to my parents' house and placed the printed invoice on Dad's kitchen table. He barely looked at it. That company bills in phases, he said. The closed work order says $2,400. They probably haven't entered the rest yet. The report you sent me says $5,800. Dad pushed the paper back toward me with one finger. Are you accusing me of stealing from you? My question had been about an invoice. His answer turned it into a trial of my character. No, I said too quickly. I'm trying to understand the difference. You work with hospital vendors and think that makes you an expert on construction. That isn't what I said. If you need to audit every decision, take the properties back. The kitchen smelled of coffee and the lemon oil Mom used on the table. She had been standing at the counter, slicing apples. At Dad's words, the knife stopped moving. Richard, she murmured. He rose from his chair. I have quarterly taxes due in 3 weeks, he said. Insurance renewals are sitting on my desk. One tenant is already late, and the city wants another inspection. But if my own daughter thinks I'm dishonest, I'm finished. A reasonable response would have been to accept his resignation and hire a professional manager. My body had responded as if he had threatened to leave the country. I don't want you to quit, I said. Then stop treating me like an employee. The distinction should have warned me. He was performing work attached to assets I owned, yet he wanted the authority of a father without the accountability of a manager. At the time, all I heard was the possibility of losing him. Mom placed the knife down. Your father finally has something that makes him feel needed, she said. Do you understand what you're doing to him? I asked for an invoice. You know how proud he is. The phone rang before I could answer. Emily's name flashed on the kitchen counter. Mom put the call on speaker because Emily had taken her newborn daughter to the hospital for observation after a fever. The baby was stable, but Emily sounded exhausted. What's happening? She asked after hearing Dad's voice. Nothing, I said. Dad laughed once. Your sister thinks I'm stealing from her. That isn't what I said. Please don't do this tonight, Emily said. A monitor beeped faintly behind her. Lily's been here for 6 hours. Mom's already upset. Can everybody just stop? Everybody meant me. Dad's anger had entered the room. Mom's fear had amplified it, and somehow peace became my responsibility. By the time I left their house, I had withdrawn my request for direct access. A week later, Mom emailed me a new monthly dashboard. It looked clean and professional. Each property had a section for occupancy, major repairs, taxes, insurance, and a line labeled Net Operating Result. Dad called it transparency. I thanked him for it. Back in my new house, the login sheet glowed beneath the desk lamp. 5 years earlier, I had not failed to notice a discrepancy. I had found one, asked the right question, and allowed the answer to become a judgment about whether I loved my father. The mistake was not ignorance. The mistake was accepting emotional punishment as a valid control procedure. A new row went into my ledger. Under Source, I typed Login Instruction Sheet. Under Variance, I typed Owner denied direct access to source data. Under Resolution, my fingers paused. Then I wrote Access withdrawn after emotional pressure. PDF dashboard substituted. The sentence looked clinical. That helped. Clinical language created enough distance for me to look at what had happened without falling back into the role Mom had assigned me. The dashboard files were still stored in an old email folder. I downloaded the earliest one and searched for gross rental income. No result. I searched for total deposits. No result. I searched for collected rent. Nothing. Every report began with expenses and ended with net operating result. Dad had never shown me what entered the account. He had only shown me what remained after he decided what everything meant. The quarterly owner draw appeared as $3,000, exactly the same amount every 3 months, year after year. No seasonal change. No vacancy adjustment. No increase when rents rose. A fixed payment had trained me not to look for the actual profit. Near dawn, I closed the dashboard and stood. The room across the hall was empty, except for 2 unopened boxes and a folding chair. During the inspection, I had imagined built-in shelves along one wall and 2 desks facing the window. At first, the second desk had belonged to someone in my plans. Years before the house, before the duplex dashboard, I had dated a man who believed a request could be refused without ending a relationship. That seemed ordinary when applied to everyone except my parents. Emily had been preparing to open her first salon. The landlord required a larger security deposit or an additional guarantor because the business had no operating history. Dad invited the man I was dating to dinner. Dessert had barely reached the table before Dad slid a folder across to him. "It's only a backup signature," Dad said. "Emily has the income projections." The man opened the folder, read 2 pages and closed it again. "I'm not comfortable guaranteeing a commercial lease," he said. Dad's expression hardened. "You're planning a future with Claire." "Yes. Then Emily's future affects you." "It affects me as someone who cares about her. It doesn't make me responsible for her lease." The answer had been calm. No insult. No raised voice. Dad turned to me. "Is this the kind of person you want beside you? Someone who watches your sister struggle and protects his own wallet?" Mom looked down at her plate. Emily began crying before anyone had actually denied her anything beyond a signature. That night, the man I was dating told me he would help Emily review the projections or find other financing options. He would not sign. My response still embarrassed me. "You made Dad feel like you don't see us as part of your life. He asked me to accept a legal obligation for a business I don't control." It was one signature. "No, Claire. It was a risk. Those are not the same thing." The relationship did not end that night. It thinned over the following months, worn down by every occasion when I translated my parents' demands into tests of love. He never asked me to choose him over them. He asked me to stop allowing them to decide what he owed. I could not do it. Standing in the empty room, I finally understood why I had imagined the second desk and left the space unfinished. Part of me had bought the house as proof that I needed nobody. A stronger part had bought it because I wanted one place where nobody else defined who belonged, what they owed, or when they had to surrender something to stay. The emptiness was not evidence that my parents had been right about me. It was space I had not yet chosen how to fill. A search through my archived email found the salon message within minutes. Dad's subject line read, 1. Time help for Emily. The body of the email was brief. Your sister only needs support until the salon is established. This is one-time family help, not a permanent arrangement. Everyone contributes according to ability. Everyone had meant me. According to ability had meant there was no upper limit. The message went into the timeline. A second search for tax packet returned 8 annual emails from Mom, each arriving within the same 2-week window. The attachments were password-protected PDFs containing summaries for the CPA who prepared my returns. Dad had always delivered them early. No missed deadline, no frantic April phone call, no envelope left unopened. That reliability had been one of his strongest shields. At 7 in the morning, I sent the CPA a request for every source document he had received for the duplexes, including the annual rental summaries, expense schedules, and any correspondence identifying who supplied the figures. His reply arrived before lunch. Claire, I can provide the tax packets and final work papers through the secure portal. For clarity, the rental figures and expense classifications were supplied each year by Richard. Diane generally transmitted the spreadsheets. My office prepared the returns from those materials. We did not maintain the underlying tenant ledgers or bank reconciliations. The message did not absolve the CPA of every question, but it clarified the chain. Dad supplied the numbers. Mom transmitted them. The CPA converted them into tax forms. My signature sat at the end. By early afternoon, 8 folders appeared in the portal. Each contained a Schedule E, a depreciation report, and a spreadsheet summarizing rent and expenses. The files looked more complete than Mom's dashboards. Gross rent appeared at last. It was lower than I expected. The account's deposit history was still downloading from the bank, so I began with the check images already embedded in the statements I had received. Many tenants had paid by check during the earlier years. Each deposit included a scanned image. One property had 2 units. According to the tax packet for that year, gross rent from the building was $34,800. The deposited checks visible in the account totaled more than that before I had even reached October. I stopped and recalculated. Then I checked each image against the deposit date. No duplicated checks. No security deposit mistakenly included. No transfer from another property. By the end of December, the tenant checks from that single duplex totaled $52,900. The Schedule E reported $34,800. The difference was $18,100. One property. 1 year. My chair rolled backward when I stood too quickly. The room tilted for half a second, not from surprise alone but from the shape of the risk. Underreported rental income did not remain inside a private dispute. The returns carried my name. Whatever Dad had done with the money, the tax responsibility began with the owner. The instinct to call him arrived so powerfully that my hand moved toward the phone. He would explain. He would say, some deposits belong to the next year. Some were reimbursements. Some were returned checks. Some were security deposits. He would make the numbers complicated enough for me to feel ashamed of asking. My hand stopped. The source documents did not need his permission to exist. A new email went to an independent tax professional whose practice focused on rental property corrections. I described the issue without accusing anyone of a crime. Source deposits appeared inconsistent with the rental figures reported on prior returns. A former manager had controlled the data. I needed an independent review and advice on correcting any affected filings. The consultation fee made me hesitate. My mortgage payment was due in 9 days. Repairs at the duplexes had not yet been assessed. The house still needed window coverings, and the dining room light flickered whenever the upstairs heater started. Paying a professional might reveal that I owed more money before I recovered a single dollar. Avoiding the review would leave my name attached to numbers I no longer trusted. I entered my card information and booked the appointment. Then I opened a separate savings sub-account and transferred enough to begin a tax reserve. It was not enough to cover the worst possibility. It was enough to mark the money as unavailable for furniture, paint, or anything else that could wait. That transfer changed the case from a mystery into a cost. Mom emailed while I was naming the new account. The subject line read, "Your father's records." Claire, you chose to have your father manage the properties because you did not have the time. He carried that burden without charging what a professional company would charge. It is unfair to rewrite the arrangement now because you are angry about the party. No mention of the lender file. No mention of the duplicated invoices. No mention of the account number she had known before I said it. My reply took 40 minutes, though it contained only a few paragraphs. I authorized limited property management. I did not surrender my right to inspect source records. Trusting someone to perform work is not authorization to change rental income, duplicate expenses, or transfer funds for unrelated purposes. Please identify who prepared each annual rental income figure and who classified the expenses supplied to the CPA. Attach the source ledgers. I will discuss financial matters only through email. Her response came almost immediately. Your father lost his temper because you humiliated him in front of strangers. You know he would never deliberately hurt you. The sentence pressed against the bruise inside my mouth more effectively than a finger. A stranger had not struck me. A stranger had recorded it. The difference mattered. I answered with the police report number. The incident was recorded and reported. Do not describe it as something I caused by asking a question. Please answer the questions about the rental figures. Mom waited nearly an hour. Richard advanced more than $38,000 of his own money over the years. If you continue making accusations before reviewing everything, you will regret it. 38,000. Dad's email had demanded 47,000. I had not sent his demand to Mom. Neither number appeared in my message. The fact that she corrected one, invented total with another, told me they were discussing their response, while insisting I should treat each statement as spontaneous truth. I added both amounts to the ledger. Under explanation received, I entered Dad's claim. Under the next row, I entered Mom's correction. Under source, I linked the emails. The number had changed before I had challenged it. My phone rang at 4:17. Uncle Alan. For several seconds, I watched his name vibrate across the screen. At the party, he had positioned himself between Dad and the guests only after the slap. Before that, he had heard the demand and said nothing. The call almost went to voicemail. Then I remembered his private message. Your father once said the duplexes earned more than he reported to you. I answered. Hi, Uncle Alan. His exhale was audible. Are you all right? The question arrived almost 24 hours after strangers had asked it. I'm safe. Your mother says you're going through old accounts. She told you that? She's worried. What exactly did Dad say about the duplex income? A pause followed. I don't want to get between you and your parents. You already are. You sent me the message. That was private. It still needs to be accurate. The firmness in my voice sounded unfamiliar without being loud. When did he say it? Alan cleared his throat. A couple of years ago. Which year? I don't know. Where were you? At the cabin, I think. Was it summer or winter? Summer. Around your mother's birthday. Mom's birthday was in July. Who else was there? Diane. Maybe Jason came up later. What were Dad's exact words? I can't promise exact. Give me the closest version you can remember. Another breath passed through the line. He said those buildings threw off more cash than you knew what to do with. He said it was better if he kept the excess working for the people who needed it. The room seemed to narrow around the sentence. Did he say Emily? Not directly. Did you ask what he meant? No. Why not? Alan's answer came more quietly. Your father had helped me with a loan. I was behind after the divorce. I didn't want him asking why I was questioning his business. There it was. Not confusion. A transaction. Dad's generosity had purchased silence without needing an explicit agreement. Would you be willing to write down what you remember, including the approximate date and who was present? Claire, I don't want this used in court. I didn't say court. I'm building a timeline. You can decide later whether you're willing to sign anything. You sound like this is one of your hospital reviews. It's the only way I know to separate what happened from what people now wish had happened. Alan made a small sound that might have been agreement. I'll email you, he said. Please include that Dad had previously loaned you money. That makes me look bad. It explains why you stayed quiet. His silence lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, all right. No gratitude came out of me. He was not rescuing me. He was documenting one thing he should have questioned years earlier. After the call, I recorded the time and wrote a summary while the wording remained fresh. Alan's statement could support a pattern, but it could not prove a transfer. Memory was not a bank record. Loyalty was not a ledger. The distinction mattered more every hour. Work the next morning required a kind of concentration I had once used to escape everything else. A regional distribution center had flagged a discrepancy in sterile tubing inventory. The purchasing system showed one quantity, the receiving log another, and the warehouse count a third. Under ordinary circumstances, the mismatch would have occupied every available part of my mind. Instead, Dad's invoices kept appearing between columns. One purchase order, 3 receiving records, 1 roof invoice, 3 payments. The similarity made my stomach tighten, but it also steadied me. At work, nobody resolved a discrepancy by insisting the supplier felt insulted. The team traced the source, documented the variance, and corrected the control. My manager asked me to stay after our morning call. Her expression carried concern rather than suspicion. "Hannah told me there was an incident at your housewarming," she said. "She didn't send the video. She said you asked her to preserve it." "That's correct. Are you in immediate danger?" "No. The entry code has been changed, and there's a police report." Saying the words in an office made heat rise along my neck. My private life had crossed into a place where I was supposed to be measured, prepared, and dependable. Part of me expected the room to reinterpret every decision I had ever made. My manager did not. Because several employees witnessed it, "I'd like HR to document that the event occurred outside work," she said. "You can decide how much detail to provide." I'd rather tell them before somebody else tells a distorted version. The HR business partner joined us 15 minutes later. I gave her the report number and explained that a relative had struck me during a private event. The original recording was being preserved as evidence and was not to be circulated. No financial documents were shared. No dramatic history was offered. Only what the workplace needed to know. "Has anyone involved contacted you through company systems?" the HR representative asked. "Not since the incident." "Do they know where you work?" "Yes." "Do they know your direct email address?" "No." The answer left my mouth too quickly. An old memory surfaced before the HR representative could move to the next question. Years earlier, Jason had emailed the salon lease projections to my work address because the file was too large for Mom's email account. My corporate address had appeared in the copied thread alongside his business account. He knew it. Possibly Emily did too. "My brother-in-law may have an old copy of it," I said. "He sent business documents there several years ago." The HR representative made a note. "We'll ask reception and security to route any contact rather than engage," she said. "Please forward anything sent to company systems. Don't respond from your work account." "I won't." My manager leaned forward. "Your performance is not in question, Claire. I want that to be clear." The assurance released a breath I had not realized I was holding. "I appreciate that. If you need time for police or legal appointments, tell me. You don't need to explain the entire situation each time." Support did not require surrendering control. The realization was almost as unsettling as the meeting itself. Before leaving, I made one request. "If anyone asks Hannah or the others about the video, can the instruction be that they preserve it and not discuss it?" "Yes," the HR representative said. "We can send a limited reminder about privacy and evidence preservation without identifying details." That was enough. Nobody offered to confront Dad. Nobody promised to fix my finances. They gave me a process, and I chose how to use it. Back at my desk, an alert from the secure tax portal waited beside the tubing report. The remaining annual files had finished uploading. For the next 2 hours, I did my job. The warehouse discrepancy turned out to be a unit of measure conversion between individual pieces and cases. One incorrect field had multiplied the apparent inventory. A single label had changed the meaning of every number downstream. When the workday ended, I carried that lesson home. Dinner remained untouched while I opened the oldest Schedule E beside the operating account deposits. The first year showed a smaller variance. The second showed more. By the fourth, the gap widened enough that it could no longer hide inside ordinary repairs or vacancies. Each tax return carried my electronic signature authorization. Each rental summary had come from Dad. Each transmission email had come from Mom. The owner draw remained $3,000 every quarter, clean and predictable, while the gross income moved beneath it unseen. That fixed payment had not been proof the properties barely earned more. It had been an allowance. A notification appeared at the edge of my screen. Mom had replied again. "We handled everything because you asked us to. You cannot punish us now for doing what you were too busy to do yourself." The old shame stirred. Too busy, too suspicious, too difficult, too alone to need 4 bedrooms. My fingers rested on the keyboard, but no response was necessary. Her email had answered nothing about the numbers. Instead, I added a new column to the ledger: tax exposure. The first year's preliminary difference went into the cell, then the second, then the third. By the time I reached the year with the $18,100 gap, the problem no longer fit inside a dispute over missing profit. Dad had not merely decided where my money should go. He had supplied lower rental income to the accountant, allowed tax returns to be filed under my name, and relied on my signature to make his version official. For years, I had believed he was hiding money from me. With the Schedule E open beside the deposited checks, I understood something worse. He had used my name to sign a version of my income that had never existed. Part 3. The roof that was never replaced. He had used my name to sign a version of my income that had never existed. The sentence stayed on the screen long after the numbers blurred. Outside, rain tapped against the new dining room windows in uneven bursts. The fixture above the table flickered when the upstairs heat came on, then steadied. I had planned to replace it after closing, along with the bare shades and the cracked tile near the back door. Those things suddenly belonged to a different category of life. Not emergencies. Not evidence. Not yet. The operating account statements, tax packets, and duplicated invoices covered most of the table. My quarterly owner draws formed a neat pattern through the chaos. $3,000 every 3 months, deposited with the regularity of a pension payment. That consistency had reassured me for years. A property with vacancies, repairs, rent increases, and changing insurance costs should not produce the exact same distribution every quarter. Yet the sameness had never felt suspicious because Dad had presented it as discipline. "Real estate rewards patience," he used to say. "Leave the excess in reserve, and don't treat rent like a paycheck." It had sounded responsible. Now the fixed deposits looked less like distributions and more like an allowance chosen to keep me satisfied. The properties could not remain in the middle of an investigation without someone handling the actual work. Tenants still needed repairs. Insurance still had deadlines. Whatever Dad had done, allowing the buildings to deteriorate, would only create new losses under my name. At a little after 7 the next morning, I opened the contact card for Maya Ortiz. We had met 9 months earlier at a local seminar for small rental property owners. I had attended because Dad complained that new city inspection rules were becoming unreasonable. Maya had spoken on a panel about documentation, tenant communication, and separating ownership from management authority. Afterward, she had handed me a card. "You don't have to manage the properties yourself to remain informed," she had said. "A good manager should make source records easier to see, not harder." The card had remained in my desk until the move. My thumb hovered over the call button. Hiring her meant paying a management fee while I was already facing tax expenses, mortgage payments, and unknown repairs. It also meant acknowledging that Dad's role was over before he agreed that it was over. The second part frightened me more than the first. Maya answered on the 4th ring. "This is Maya. My name is Claire Bennett. We met at the South Sound Property Workshop last fall. I remember. You owned 2 duplexes, but your father managed them." The description sounded different now. "Past tense," I said. "I need immediate management coverage and an independent condition assessment." Her voice remained even. "Are the tenants in danger of losing utilities or housing?" "Not that I know of. The operating account is restricted while I review unauthorized transactions. I can fund legitimate emergency work directly." "What access do you currently control?" "The deeds are in my name. The bank recognizes me as the owner. My father's online access has been suspended. I have account statements and partial tenant records, but not the complete rent roll or maintenance history." "Do you want management, accounting reconstruction, or both?" "Management first. I'm handling the reconstruction with separate professionals. The distinction mattered. Maya was not being hired to discover my parents' secret or tell me what to do with it. Her work would be narrower. Keep the properties functioning. Preserve records. Tell me what was physically true. I can send a limited scope agreement this morning, she said. Before I accept rent or contact vendors, I'll need proof of ownership and written confirmation that the previous authority has ended. You'll have it within the hour. One more question. Does the prior manager know you're hiring someone else? He knows he no longer has access. That wasn't my question. My hand tightened around the phone. No, I haven't told him who will replace him. Then the first tenant notice should come from you. Clear, neutral, and in writing. No accusations. State the effective date and the new contact information. That's what I want. Good. Owners sometimes use a management change to recruit tenants into a dispute. Don't do that. I won't. Maya emailed the agreement 15 minutes later. The fee made my stomach contract, but the document gave me something Dad never had. A defined scope. Rent collection. Repair coordination. Inspection records. Monthly statements with source documents available through a read-only portal. No gifts. No distributions to relatives. No authority to borrow against the properties. No right to change ownership information. I read every page twice, added a requirement that expenses above an agreed threshold needed my written approval unless there was an immediate safety threat, then signed. The decision changed the shape of the problem. Dad was no longer the person I needed to persuade to behave differently. He was the former manager whose records required review. By 9:30, formal notices had gone to all 4 tenants. The language stayed simple. Management authority had changed. Future rent would go through Maya's portal. Maintenance requests should be documented through a new number. No person other than Maya or me could authorize entry. The first response came from Rosa Delgado at the older duplex. She called rather than emailing. Miss Bennett. Rosa. Yes. This is Claire. Is your father okay? The question landed somewhere between concern and caution. He is no longer managing the property. All right. A pause followed. Did something happen? I'm reviewing the records. I don't want to involve you in a private dispute, but Maya will inspect the building and confirm any outstanding repairs. Will that include the roof this time? My eyes moved toward the 3 duplicated invoices. What do you mean by this time? Your father collected information for it twice, maybe 3 times. He said the full replacement was approved, but then he said you changed your mind because it cost too much. The room seemed to narrow around Rosa's voice. When did he tell you I changed my mind? Last winter. After the leak over the back bedroom. Was any part of the roof replaced? Not the whole thing. A man put sealant around a vent. It took maybe an hour. The invoice on my table described a full replacement. $9,800. Do you still have any messages or notices about the work? I save everything. My husband says I keep too much paper, but I save rent checks too. Please don't throw anything away. A nervous laugh came through the line. I wasn't planning to. Maya and I would like to visit. You don't have to discuss anything beyond the condition of your unit and the payments you made. When? Whatever time works for you. Tomorrow morning? We'll be there. Rosa hesitated before ending the call. One more thing, Miss Bennett. Yes? Your father said you didn't like tenants calling you because you thought every repair was an excuse to avoid rent. The accusation was so specific that for a moment I forgot how to answer. I never said that. That's what I thought. Why? Because every year you sent us a holiday card with your own return address. Someone who wanted us to disappear probably wouldn't do that. After the call, I sat without moving. Dad had not only hidden information from me, he had built a version of me for the tenants, one that explained why repairs were delayed and why they should never contact the owner directly. He could collect the rent, deny the work, and make my supposed stinginess responsible for both. The duplicated roof invoice was no longer just a missing expense. It had a tenant living beneath it. The next morning, Maya met me on the sidewalk outside Rosa's duplex. She wore waterproof boots and carried a tablet in a protective case. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained the flat gray of wet concrete. Moss darkened the porch steps, and one gutter sagged near the corner. Maya looked up before saying hello. That rear section needs attention. Can you tell from the ground whether the roof was replaced within the last few years? Not conclusively. I can tell the shingles don't look new. Rosa opened the door before we knocked. She was in her early 60s, with reading glasses hanging from a chain and a cardigan buttoned unevenly over a blue blouse. Warm air carrying the smell of coffee and cinnamon drifted into the hallway. "Come in," she said. I put everything on the table. A thick envelope sat beside 3 shoeboxes. Maya glanced at me. "You handle payment records," she said. "I'll document the unit." That division was exactly why I had hired her. Rosa opened the first shoebox. Inside, canceled checks were arranged by year, each bundle wrapped with a rubber band and labeled in black marker. "My bank stopped returning the originals, so these are printouts after that," she said. "The earlier ones are actual checks. Did you pay anything in cash?" "Never. Your father offered a discount once if we did, but my husband said no." "When was that?" "About 4 years ago. He said it would save bookkeeping. A cash discount would have created another path without records." Rosa's husband had closed it. I began with the year already reflected in the tax packet. The first check matched the deposit image I had downloaded. So did the second. Each memo line carried the month and unit number. January, February, March. The rent increased in May. Dad's annual summary did not. "Did he give you written notice of the increase?" I asked. Rosa reached into the envelope and removed a folded letter on Bennett construction stationery. The letter stated that rent would rise by $150 because of increased maintenance and insurance costs. Dad had signed it as property manager. My report showed only a $50 increase. "Was there another increase later?" I asked. "The next year, $100. That notice was also in the envelope. By the time I finished the first bundle, the amount Rosa had paid exceeded Dad's reported rent from her unit by more than $2,000. One tenant. 1 year. Maya returned from the hallway. "There's staining on the ceiling in the back bedroom," she said. "Moisture reading is elevated but not currently saturated." "Rosa, has it leaked during the last storm?" "A little." I put a towel down. "Please submit that through the new portal today. I'm treating it as an active repair." Rosa nodded. "What about the roof?" I asked. "I'll need a licensed roofer on it, but the attic and exterior suggest patching, not replacement. The sheathing visible around the access point is older. The vent boots are worn. Nothing I saw supports a recent full re-roof." Maya did not say the invoice was false. She said the physical condition did not support it. That difference kept the conclusion where it belonged. After the evidence. Rosa took a small stack of emails from the envelope. "Your father sent these when I kept asking," she said. One message read, "Claire has decided to postpone capital improvements until the property's rebuild reserve. I cannot override the owner." Another said, "I understand your concern, but Claire considers the staining cosmetic unless active water is present." My name appeared in both. I had never seen either message. The back bedroom smelled faintly of damp plaster. A pale brown mark spread from one corner of the ceiling, its edges uneven like a map. Rosa stood in the doorway behind me. "I thought about writing to you," she said. "Then your father said you would raise the rent again if I bothered you directly." The words made my face burn. Not because I had done it, because my authority had been used to make someone afraid of me. "From now on, contact Maya for repairs," I said. "If the issue is not addressed, contact me. There will be no retaliation for reporting a problem." Rosa studied my face, as if deciding whether the sentence could be trusted. "All right." I returned to the dining table and photographed every rent notice and email with Rosa's permission. She agreed to upload copies to a secure folder rather than hand over the originals. Before we left, Maya asked for access to the basement. The furnace cabinet carried the service sticker I remembered from 5 years earlier. The same company. The same control board. A newer sticker showed an ordinary maintenance visit from the previous fall, not the full system replacement listed in one of Dad's reports. Outside, Maya stood beneath the sagging gutter and made notes. "I'm going to request 3 separate estimates," she said. Roof, heating, and the rear windows. Dad's reports say the heating system was replaced. Parts of it are older than the report date. The windows? One is listed in your folder as a full replacement, correct? Yes. The serial stamp on that unit predates the invoice by several years. A delivery truck passed, spraying water from the curb. 3 large repairs. 3 records that did not match the property. What does match? I asked. Maya looked up from the tablet. The water heater appears consistent with the replacement date in your records. The pressure, relief valve, model number, and permit history line up. There was also legitimate plumbing work under the kitchen sink. Relief surprised me. Not because I wanted Dad to be innocent, but because a world where every line was false would have been harder to prove and harder to understand. Mark those as verified, I said. You're not asking me to review the finances. No, I'm asking you to tell me what exists. Then that's what I'll do. The first roofing estimate arrived the following afternoon. The contractor recommended replacement of the rear slope and repair of the front, with full replacement likely within 2 years. The immediate work would cost several $1,000s. The heating inspection found a failing component that needed prompt attention before colder weather. One rear window had rot along the frame. None of the repairs could be delayed while I argued with Dad. The operating account contained enough money to cover them, but some funds might be disputed or needed for taxes. Using every available dollar would leave no buffer for insurance, utilities, or another emergency. My personal savings had already been divided between mortgage reserves, the tax review, and the cost of moving. The dining room light flickered again while I compared estimates. Replacing it would cost a few $100s. The window shades could wait. The built-in shelves could wait. A new couch could wait. The roof could not. Approval emails went to Maya for the emergency heating work and the first phase of roof repair. The rotted window would follow after the next rent cycle, assuming no new safety problem appeared. Signing those approvals hurt more than I expected. Dad's records said the work had already been paid for. My bank balance said I was paying for it now. The same properties were charging me twice, once through money that had vanished, and again through repairs that had never occurred. Still, the choice belonged to me, not to Dad, not to the fear of what the investigation might uncover, not to the temptation to postpone responsibility until somebody else admitted fault. Maya sent confirmation that the contractors had been scheduled. Under it, she included a scan of one of the largest invoices in Dad's folder. The vendor name was Cedar Sound Property Services, LLC. According to the invoice, Cedar Sound had completed exterior repairs, drainage correction, and window replacement at both duplexes. The total was more than $20,000. No work order numbers appeared. No permit numbers. No material list. Only broad descriptions and round totals. Public business records showed an active limited liability company registered through a commercial agent in Olympia. No owner's home address appeared. The filing itself did not connect Cedar Sound to anyone I knew. That mattered. A familiar-looking name or address could create suspicion. It did not create proof. The W-9 in Dad's folder gave me more. A tax identification number. A mailing address belonging to a commercial mailbox center. A vendor contact phone number. The last 4 digits caught my attention first. I had seen them before. A search through archived email found the old salon lease thread. Jason's business signature from years earlier listed the same number beneath the name of a consulting venture he had abandoned after Emily's salon opened. That did not establish that Jason owned Cedar Sound. Phone numbers were reused, transferred, and listed without permission. Another field on the vendor contact sheet carried an email address beginning with remittance. The domain belonged to Cedar Sound, but the forwarding notation beneath it had been printed automatically by Dad's accounting software. Forward to accounts at Northline Ventures. Northlight. The name Emily had used when she said Jason had lost money Dad invested for him. My breathing slowed. Not because the answer had arrived, because a path had appeared. Cedar Sound could be legitimate and still have used Jason's old number. Northline could have provided bookkeeping services. A forwarded email did not prove the destination of the funds. The evidence needed to remain narrower than the conclusion. I added the documents to the ledger with precise labels. Cedar Sound invoice. W9. Vendor contact sheet. Phone number previously used by Jason. Remittance email, forwarding to Northline Ventures. Status. Connection indicated. Beneficial interest, not established. No accusations went into an email. No message went to Emily. Not yet. The following bank statement contained 4 payments to Cedar Sound over 18 months. Each amount was large and rounded. Each appeared under a different repair category: roofing, drainage, exterior remediation, capital reserve project. Within 48 hours of 3 Cedar Sound payments, another transfer left the operating account under the description owner distribution. None of those distributions had reached me. The 4th was followed by a payment labeled management reimbursement. Dad's fixed quarterly deposit to me remained exactly $3,000. The extra money went somewhere else. Sitting at the same table where Mom had placed the unauthorized loan papers, I drew a line through the dates. Cedar Sound received money. A second transfer followed. The reports changed the label. My payment did not change. The sequence repeated too cleanly to dismiss, but the destination remained hidden behind names I did not control. For the first time since the party, the uncertainty did not make me reach for Dad. It made me define the next question. I did not need him to explain what Cedar Sound was. I needed records showing where the money went after the account released it. Until then, Jason's old phone number was a clue. Northline's email was a clue. The timing was a pattern. None of them alone was the truth. Together, they pointed toward the door the money had passed through. Cedar Sound did not carry my brother-in-law's name, but every time that company appeared in the records, nearly the same amount vanished from the operating account within 2 days. I still did not know where it ended. I only knew it had not stayed behind to repair a single roof.